I'm going to demonstrate mixing the composition and pumping some alcohol red gum bound stars using my 49 pin 3/4 inch star plate. The preliminary figuring that I've done is that if I'm pumping 3/4 inch diameter by 3/4 inch stars, that's 1/3 of a cubic inch, 0.33 cubic inches, times 49 stars is 16.24 cubic inches. I know that these comps pump at about 1 ounce per cubic inch. So pumping at 1 ounce per cubic inch, 16.24 cubic inches would equate to about a pound of composition, 16.24 ounces. That's 461 grams, multiplying ounces by 28.4 grams per ounce. I want to pump 2 plates, 2 of the 49 star plates, each of these colors that I'm pumping. So, and I want to have a little bit extra. I don't want to run short. So 2 times 461 would be about 920. I'm calculating about 1,000 gram batches of the composition. Then I'll have a little bit left over that I'll finish up with a 3/4 inch single star pump. So I know first of all, to pump 2 plates, I want 1,000 grams of composition. So I've printed out a 1,000 gram batch size worksheet of this yellow star Ribbon Cloud Go-Getter, which I'm just going to pump standard solid 3/4 inch stars with. Then I know that my press will maxes out at 34,000 pounds of force. 17 tons of force is what my large hydraulic press will put out. So if I can put out 34,000 pounds of force on one of the star plates, one star is 0.442 square inches, 49 stars is 21.65 square inches. The 34,000 pounds of force maximum my press will put out divided by the 21.65 square inches equates to 1,570 psi on the composition, and I know these comps press nicely at about 1,500 psi on the comp. So my press's maximum force on this 3/4 inch star plate will press these stars nicely at 1,570 psi. So I've set my press, the pressure relief valves on the press and the pump, I've set them for maximum allowable pressure and force so that I can get my full 34,000 pounds of force. Weighing out my individual chemicals then for that 1,000 gram batch, I have my barium nitrate, which I have blade milled. Since that was a little bit on the coarse side, I want to get all these chemicals as fine as possible. I have my potassium perchlorate, my calcium carbonate, my red gum, my Parlon. Parlon I put through a 100 mesh screen, and I only use what passes the 100 mesh screen, so it's nice and fine. The more coarse stuff, about a quarter of it to a third of it will sit on top of a 100 mesh screen, and I set that aside and save that for a Parlon bound comp where the acetone will be softening the Parlon anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's coarse. And the last chemical I've got to weigh out is my 320, my fine magnesium. This is 325 mesh, and I want 93 grams of that. And so there's all the chemicals I need for that batch of composition. I'll screen them together and then weigh them totaled up together to make sure they do come up to the desired 1,000 grams and I haven't forgotten anything or misweighed anything. And I have a 40 mesh screen, which is what I mix my compositions through. I'll dump all the chemicals, individual chemicals, on that mixing screen. I would normally do this outdoors where the dust wouldn't be a problem, but for videoing purposes, it's nice to do it indoors. I'll wear some nitro gloves as I'm working with this composition. All these chemicals were fine once the Parlon was put through the 100 mesh screen. Red gum, potassium perchlorate, calcium carbonate, magnesium, they all come nice and fine, and this barium nitrate's been milled in the rocket blender until it's nice and fine. I do wash the rocket blender out between uses of individual chemicals normally to avoid any cross-contamination of one chemical to another. Working with any barium compound, I'd normally wear a dust mask too. Barium can be toxic. Some people are very sensitive to it. So I won't wear one right now as I'm talking, but I would normally wear a dust mask working with a barium compound. It's one of the toxic chemicals we use. And I'll just screen this together, shake it in a mixing tub, weigh it to make sure it indeed comes up to the 1,000 grams desired batch size. Then I'll screen it and shake it and screen it and shake it so it has been screened 3 times and shaken together 3 times so it's really thoroughly and homogeneously mixed together. As I'm mixing this, this is becoming a very flammable composition naturally since it's a star comp. And so I'm gentle with it. I don't have any sources of ignition anywhere around me. I don't have any unnecessary quantities of composition exposed, just to minimize the risks as much as possible. It's not a particularly sensitive comp as long as I don't go beating on it with a hammer or exposing it to flame or sparks. It's not going to go off on me. Let's see, I think I'll get my scale and tare it to 0. Get my scale, tare it to 0 with the mixing tub on top of it, and then weigh this batch and see how much it comes up to. And that weighs 999 grams, 998 grams. That settled down. Well, 999 again. So that's very, very close. Within 0.1% of precision. So I'll settle for that. When I'm shaking a composition, I hold the lid on with both hands because if I don't, that tub's liable to pop open at some point and make one hell of a mess. And I'll screen that again, shake it, screen that again and shake it, and that will be a thoroughly mixed and homogeneous composition. And that has been screened and shaken a second time. Now I'll screen it and shake it a third time, and it'll be ready to dampen with alcohol and start pumping. The binder in this composition is the red gum. I could have used phenolic resin too, which is nice to use and reportedly makes even nicer color. But in this particular case I've used some of the red gum I have on hand, and when the alcohol hits that red gum it softens it a little bit and uses it as the binder in these stars, making very nice hard stars which are not affected by water, so I can then dampen them after they're dry with a dextrin water solution, which we call dextrin liquor. I can wet them, drain them real quickly, dump them into prime. They will not soften when they're exposed to that water, since they're alcohol red gum bound, which is a nice feature of that. They also dry very quickly when they're alcohol red gum bound. There's no water in them to interfere with ignition or burning, and they dry quickly and dry nice and hard. So there's the third screening. I'll shake it one more time and get ready to dampen it. And I can see that's a very nice homogeneous mixture. I could take a teaspoon outside and burn that, and I know it's going to burn a very pretty yellow color. Sometimes I do that just for fun really, but just to see what a line of this composition on a piece of wood burns like, just to see the color. Verify that I use the right chemicals and everything. I dampen these compositions with 5% alcohol. 1,000 gram batch will be dampened then with 50 grams of denatured alcohol. I've got a little line in here that I know if I fill it up to, it's right at 50 grams. I've got 44. There's 47. And 53 is close enough. I dump that into the comp, and rather than closing it up and shaking it right away, I prefer to stir it a little bit with my hands. That prevents the inside of the mixing tub from getting completely wet with the alcohol and having composition stick to it. This is a little bit neater way of mixing that alcohol in there. Once the alcohol is sort of dispersed a little bit, I do go ahead and shake it. Once I've done that, I put it through this is a 12 mesh screen, one of my drying screens. I put it through a 12 mesh screen to really even out the moisture, the alcohol content moisture throughout the composition. There are still spots in here from when the alcohol was dumped in there. There are spots in here that are wetter than others. Just quickly putting it through a screen, a coarse screen like a 12 mesh or an 8 mesh, helps disperse that moisture completely. I can feel the clumps as I screen it underneath my fingers, and I know I'm breaking those clumps up and dispersing those little wet spots thoroughly throughout the composition. I do this whether I'm alcohol dampening or water dampening. If I'm just dampening and not creating a putty, this is a nice way to thoroughly integrate that moisture. Now I've got a nice evenly dampened composition. I'll put it back in the mixing tub and shake it one more time. And that comp is then dampened and ready to start pumping with the star plate. Since I'm pressing this in 2 star plates full, I found it easier to just divide this into 2 batches. I know that I have made up 1,050 grams of this comp. So 525 grams would be approximately half of that. I'll take out half of it and use it in the first star plate full. There's 525 grams. I'll keep this sealed up to keep it from drying out. And I will go ahead and load up the star plate with that half of the composition. There's the whole plate for my 49 pin 3/4 inch star plate. That whole plate's twice the star diameter thick, which is 1.5 inches. And I just, since this is sort of a messy process, I do it on a little plastic tray here, and I just start gently working that composition evenly into all the holes. I want all these holes evenly filled. After I sort of get them evenly filled, I will pound on the plate just a little bit with my fists to settle any composition into voids that still might be inside the holes. And they do settle just a little bit. Now with the rest of the half of the composition, I will just sort of use the flats of my hands and my fingers to evenly go across all the holes and thoroughly fill them. And I know when it's filled, and I don't have any significant excess around on the tray, when I know it's thoroughly filled like that, and they're all evenly filled, I know these will press down to approximately 3/4 inch high, probably just a little bit higher than that, and I'll trim off the excess, but I know those will press pretty nicely. Now, put the pin plate on there and then press it in the press. Like I said, my press is set up to exert maximum force, which is 34,000 pounds of force. I've got my solid plate under the whole plate that I filled the whole plate on. I put a little backer plate on top of the plate just to distribute the forces a little bit. A little spacer block. I'm going to bring the press up to force gradually. Then when the filling is sort of evened out, I raise it, make sure that everything's sitting in there nice and evenly. Then I exert full force and let it dwell for a while on it. And on my upper gauge, that has brought it up to 34,000 pounds of force. I let it dwell. I can see the pressure within the system dropping just a little bit, which means the composition's consolidating a little bit and allowing the force within the system to drop a little bit. I'll bring it back up to maximum force, let it sit there, and I do that a couple times until I know the composition in that plate has stopped consolidating. That's staying at maximum force pretty well right there right now, so I'm going to release the pressure. I will flip the plate over, and I have some spacer blocks that I cut so that when these are in this plate, the holes are 3/4 of an inch tall. So when I press this plate like this down to those spacer blocks, there's only 3/4 of an inch of star left in the holes, and I will trim off the excess star length with a putty knife and then eject the stars completely. So I'm pressing the plate upside down, down onto those spacer blocks. The excess amount of star is going to pop up out of that plate. Since I'm using wood blocks, I exert this force gently, and I don't want to break my block in two. and I can see that I've ejected my excess amount of star composition, which I'll now trim off. I'll granulate that excess composition through a screen into the other tub of comp, and then press it with the next batch, and then use any excess composition in a single star 3/4 inch pump to use up the extra composition. So now, without the spacers in there, I've removed the spacers out of there now. Now I will eject the stars completely. And there is a nice batch of 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch stars. Granulate this excess comp through a screen to break it back up, and then that'll be pressed with the next batch. And there is my nice batch of pressed 3/4 inch stars. I'll do the next batch exactly like that. And almost all of these have come out just perfectly. A couple of them have, just a little crack at the edge from being ejected, but they'll prime up just fine. And I'll dry those in the drying box with some heat immediately, and then tomorrow I'll be able to prime them. I do treat the stars kind of gently. They become rock hard, just in an hour or two in the drying box. Right now, I've crumbled one here. They can crumble relatively easily, so I'm kind of gentle with them until I get them in the drying box. Then they harden up very quickly as that alcohol evaporates out of them, and that red gum binds everything together very nicely. I'll just put this crumbled up star in with the other composition and press the second batch. The tubs and the star plate clean up pretty easily just by spraying some alcohol onto them and let them set, and then wiping them clean with a paper towel or two. Use the same solvent that used with the stars, whether it's water or alcohol, for cleanup. That softens the binder that's in the composition and cleans everything up very nicely. keep everything centered up in the press, even, square. There's a lot of force being applied to all this, and I don't want anything springing at it, so I'm careful applying the pressure, keeping everything nice and square and true and perpendicular. That's down solidly on the spacer block. This is the excess that I will cut off, granulate, and then I'll press that with a single 3/4 inch star pump just to use up the excess composition. And there is the nice second batch of stars. I probably got enough for, maybe 8 to 10 more stars, pumping them with a single star pump. I'll just use this single star pump to pump out the rest of that composition. After I clean this plate up a little bit, I want to get some alcohol down in all these holes to sort of rinse out. Once again, I'd normally be doing this outdoors with all these alcohol fumes. I want to sort of try to rinse out the excess comp down in there. I can see that sort of washing it out. That'll keep the plate from binding up next time I use it. It'll be nice and clean. I won't have any cross contamination of the colors. I can see inside those holes now that they're getting nice and clean. I'll do the same thing with the pin plate. On the outside of some of the pins, there's a little bit of excess composition. That dissolves pretty easily and quickly with just a few spritzes of alcohol. I will get rid of this alcohol and fumes, get it out of the shop so that I don't get drunk on it and so these fumes don't accumulate and get ignited by some spark or something. One thing I thought I would show is how I determine the thickness of the spacer blocks I'm using. This is a little bit of trial and error, but trying some different thicknesses. What I do is I put the spacer blocks in the same dimension up, and I put my hole plate on there, and using a caliper which will measure the depth of something using this pin, I then just measure how deep the hole is that's left in there. And these spacer blocks are set so that's 3/4 of an inch, and what I want is a 3/4 inch star left in the holes when I trim off the excess. So I check both sides, make sure that both spacer blocks are the same dimension, and I've got very close to 3/4 inch, just a fuzz over, but it's close enough. 3/4 of an inch hole left using these spacer blocks. I had to play with some different thicknesses to get just the right dimension, and then I just cut some wood blocks that dimension. I think that's 15/16 on this particular star plate. Yeah, 15/16 inch thick is what I use on this star plate to eject the excess and have the right height star left in there. Weighing a few of these pumped stars, let's say 10 of them. 4, 6, 8, 10. I get 75 grams. I'm going to make a note of that for future reference on my star comp worksheet. I've got a pencil or pen around here somewhere. 10 stars, damp, 75 grams. So 7.5 grams each. So if I weigh out 8 grams of that composition, keep my tub sealed up so that comp doesn't dry out. I can just use up the rest of the composition real quickly, like that. And that star is, it's just a little shorter than the rest of them. I think I'll go up to 9 grams of comp with this particular method. A lot of that will even out when it's primed and everything, but I'd rather keep them as consistent as possible. Step up to 9 grams. And I'll just use up the rest of the comp that way and get another 10 stars or so. And that is identical to the ones out of the star plate, so that's what I'll use, is 9 grams of composition. And finish up the comp that way. I'm finding the comp is sticking a little bit to the end of the star pump, and the little block I'm ramming it on, so I'm just washing that off with a damp paper towel to keep the comp from building up on there, which is making the sticking even worse. that's a nice pumped star. Looks like somehow I got off just a little bit, because I'm not getting as many extra as I sort of calculated I should be getting. And I re-weighed 10 of the star plate pumped stars. There's 6, 8, and 10. It's actually 95 grams. So I've remade my notes. I was wondering why the hand pump stars were requiring 9 to 10 grams, whereas I thought I weighed 10 of the star plate pump stars at 75 grams, 7.5 grams each. So I reweighed 10, and the bottom line is that 10 of the stars are weighing 95 grams. So each one is weighing 9.5 grams, requiring 9.5 grams. Maybe my scale wasn't tared or something, because I was only getting about 10 extra stars hand pumped, whereas I did a little calculating and I should have, based on 7.5 grams each, I should have actually gotten 42, so I knew something was off somewhere. So it pays to double check all of the figures. And there's the last 10 grams of my composition. That looks starting to get a little dusty dry. I'm going to just spritz in a little more alcohol, make sure it gets bound well. And I'll put these on a drying screen, clean up my tools, and be ready for the next color, which I think is going to be green. And there's the nice batch of 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch pumped yellow brilliant stars, ready to go into the drying box for a day and then get primed. This is a batch of 98, or approximately, about 100. Spanish #1 blue, brilliant blue stars, 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch. That's now dried. And this is my Spanish monocapa prime. I have the regular prime, which is a fine powder, and also prime that I have tumbled stars in before. I like to keep those two separate, because the stuff I've tumbled stars in before gets kind of clumpy, obviously, since I'm introducing moisture into it. But if I break it up, it works just fine to coat more stars in. I'll put some of this in here. I want to keep track of how much prime 100 of these stars picks up. I've weighed that tub as it was sitting there, and it's 336 grams. I will weigh it once I tumble these stars and prime them, see how much they pick up. I've got just a bucket, a little dipping, deep frying colander. I have dextrin liquor, which is 1 part dextrin, 9 parts water boiled together to make a syrupy glue type solution. And I'm just going to put enough stars in here to cover the bottom of this deep frying container. And that's enough. I've got the bottom of the deep frying container covered. And I'm going to dump dextrin liquor onto them to wet them completely. The nice thing about these red gum alcohol bound stars is that they don't soften with this water dextrin solution. They stay nice and hard, keep their original shape. Now I'll drain those and just dunk them into the prime and tumble them. And I'll let them sit there in the prime. I don't tumble them hard. I want them to pick up a nice coating of prime. I'll dust them with a little loose prime and just let them sit there. Let that moisture suck up some prime. And I'll do the next batch once these have picked up as much of the prime as they can. I find they usually increase in size done this way. Oh, they pick up about a 1/64 inch layer, and so they increase in diameter or length by about 1/32 inch. I've dumped the stars out of the drying screen into a little tub, and I've put the drying screen on top of a tray. Now, once these have picked up all they can, I'll just fish them out, put them up back on the drying screen. They'll go back into the drying box overnight to get good and dry. And upon inspecting them and shooting one or two out of a star gun to ensure good ignition, I could do this again to pick up even a thicker layer. Usually this, so far in my testing, this one layer has been sufficient to ignite the star between the sharp edges on the star and the 1/64 inch thick coating on the star. That has ignited the star as well. But I'll verify that by shooting one or two out of a star gun. And I've probably got 2 more batches to do out of this. Then I'll put them back in the drying box. And I can store this dextrin liquor for a few days before it starts to turn bad. If I keep it in the fridge, it lasts even longer. I usually don't keep it very long. I want to get them good and wet. Let that surface soak up the glue. Drain them quickly. Dump them. Tumble them. So I'll repeat that until they're all primed. So that third load has been sort of laying in the prime, sucking up as much as possible for a few minutes. I'll take those out. So far I really like how this Spanish monocup of single layer prime has been igniting stars with just this simple priming method. I sure hope it continues. Firing a star or two hard out of a star gun can verify that. So I want to see how much did I use on that one batch of about 100 stars. I've got 278, 279 left. 336 minus 279. Is 57 grams. per 100 stars, which is about a 1,000 gram batch. So 57 grams per 1,000 grams of stars, 5.5, 6% by weight is primed. And there's the primed stars. Actually, I've got a little more on this tray that fell through. $284, so 284, 5 grams less, 52 grams. So it's about 5% by weight. The stars have picked up about 5% by weight. Of course, there's a little moisture in there too, but they'll lose a few grams of moisture. But there's about 5% by weight on the stars, and I'll see how those ignite after they're good and dry. I'll keep this good and sealed up. I'll rinse out my priming tub, my bucket, my colander, and then when the other stars are good and dry, I'll prime them as well.